question is, if you look to complex stuff, you have also gained three layers. In a car, you have even what we call the medical stuff, you have even the electronic stuff and the software. But
Yep.
these three technology waves have to unite together. And
Yeah.
therefore, if you are trying to do everything in a modern way, you cannot do it. You have to
Yeah.
combine it. And that's what we see now in the world of these nerds who do not understand this stuff. They only are isolated. They only come in when the documents are there, but they cannot come in from the glacier from the beginning of the river.
Yeah.
When the river is created by a glacier, and they see that as ERP.
Yeah.
But if you go more downstream the river, you have these activities. ERP is like an iron castle, you know.
Yeah.
But then you
Yeah.
need a fleet who is communicating there. This is microservices. Now you should combine that. People should have a creative way of thinking in an architectural element.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by one of the OGs of ERP. This is Jan Baan. And Jan has been an entrepreneur and lifelong learner, and he's currently working on eating one of the things that he created, ERP, bite by bite. Jan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, John. It's really an honor for me to join you. And even I'm always impressed in also our current way of thinking.
Yeah, bedankt. I
Yeah.
love the idea that you posed, and I agree completely with it, is that there are a lot of smart AI engineers and designers, and call it the Google kids, that have grown up with these in their hands,
Yeah.
and they don't really understand the enterprise complexity. It's kind of like most developers today could not make a text editor if they only started with a computer. You had a great analogy. Tell us more about this.
Now, I was saying, okay, it seems a little that you are drinking milk, but you have no idea it comes from a cow because you only have seen the supermarket. And that's the
Yeah,
kid Google as smart, but they have not seen the farm. And
yeah,
ERP is also isolated. It's even a real protected vendor lock-in. It's also not open. It's no wonder that they cannot understand it. It's not because it's hidden. That's
yeah,
also one of the elements.
yeah. Well, and it's those thousands of tables that have
Oh,
decomposed enterprise data
yeah,
into
yeah.
little tiny building blocks. And
I call it the mother of all complexity.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you
Because
look,
it was carefully and painstakingly engineered so
yeah,
that you could assemble it and work with it and build with it.
yeah.
But that was done so long ago
Oh yeah.
that it's overwhelming to most people to even try to think about how complex that is.
I built it more than 45 years ago when I started with this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Firsthand, you know how complex it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
So this vendor lock-in, and we see this often where even mentally, right? It's not just the complexity of the data or the system or how it's assembled and the processes, but it's even like a mental lock-in of people are so scared to touch it or even touch part of it
yeah.
that it's paralyzing to them because it was so hard and so expensive to implement the ERP. People are afraid to touch it.
Yeah.
What are you seeing there, Jan?
No, but it's even the problem. What even Clayton Christensen, the late Harvard professor, mentioned is very strong therein. He's saying you have innovation, we have sustainable innovation, where ERP seems a little sustainable innovation, but you're smarter. You bring it to efficient innovation because you see your market cap increase with also in the way you are selling it, and then you kill it totally, and you're afraid to do disruptive innovation, and that's the problem because it's also an element to protect their too high market cap. And therefore, that's what they're doing. They do it. They are not growing in revenue, but they're growing in EBITDA. And the focus is what they call best practice. But best practice is not operational excellence. Best practice is only what an SAP or an Oracle means. What I understand from what I built, what I can reuse. It's like to do best practice in a car to use all time the same components.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Best practice, and therefore monolithic is then also very dangerous because you're becoming more vendor lock-in. It seems close to corrupt, the whole vendor lock-in element.
I absolutely agree on. I would add that things like indirect or digital access
Yeah,
licensing to charge for even using the software that you've already licensed
yeah,
still feels to me like it's an overreach. And
yeah.
I
It's so
also,
old, and it's so old. It is tens of years of old.
there's two other things that really strike me with this best practice,
Yeah,
because what is a best practice? As you said, I describe best practice as what a bunch of engineers somewhere in a room 20 years ago
yeah,
thought was a good idea to build.
yeah.
But what was best practice 20 years ago? There was a
Exactly.
lot of smoking, and there was a lot more drinking, and there was a lot of other things that were happening in the world that today we know better.
But Sean, what is missing? That means that no one is focusing therein in the big vendors on customer intimacy.
Yeah.
It's only what's in for me. We are swimming, but we are sinking because we take everything for our own. And
Yeah.
that is because, and all then, and the problem is, even if you look to the ecosystem of SAP, it's hundreds of even millions every year, not only SAP, but also this 80% of this SIs, etc., are also isolated and they
Yeah.
are also locked in the same, yeah, some people say even that they are more corrupt than the mafia because the mafia cannot make 90% gross margin. If you look at to it, the core is too much. Uh, the services are outsourced. The market cap increased with this sustainable of efficient innovation. The logic is now isolated, but it will kill. Now we see with reverse engineering totally changing elements because what
Yeah.
was hidden yesterday is becoming open with AI.
Yeah.
And therefore now, we see therein that it's very simple. You have tools already with engineering in these elements. What you see then, automatically every screen translates already the data model.
Yeah.
And the show will become over.
And I think this is one of those things where when you take the frustration with vendor lock in and then you take the complicated data model
Yeah.
that most people today don't understand, generative AI is starting to get to the point where it
Yeah,
can
but it's too
understand parts of
complicated.
it,
Yeah.
but only parts because
Yeah.
of the context window.
Yeah.
And what I think we're both seeing is we're seeing this idea that what people call best practice actually just means that every business is the same,
It's
which
worthless.
means that it's pretty damn hard to be
Yeah.
special, unique, or different when you're all running the same best practice process. So, how do you differentiate? How do you add
Exactly.
value compared to your competitors if you're all running the same
Now,
processes?
and that's the same. Now you can say, okay, there are some elements are the same, are generic. But in some cases, maybe when 80% is generic, but still the 20% unique is making your EBITDA and do all the
Yeah,
elements. Now, what we see now, if you decouple it, then the generic part can be there, but in the downstream elements with microservices, there you make your unique value. And
yeah,
every customer should be unique therein in their
yeah,
processes and optimize it.
absolutely.
And then
And
you have much more competition even.
yeah. Well, and I think about a company doesn't differentiate itself strategically or in added value to a customer by the way they run accounts payable. They just need that to be as automated as possible. It's almost like the entire group
Yeah,
is effectively waste when we think about
absolutely.
lean
Absolutely.
engineering.
Yeah,
So we want it to basically disappear.
yeah,
No, we want the people to go find another job, of
yeah,
course,
yeah.
but that kind of shift, because as you and I were talking, I think we agreed that the last 20 years have been a little light on any real material change in
Yeah,
the innovation coming
yeah,
out of the core
yeah,
ERPs.
yeah.
There's lots of acquisitions, but then those acquisitions don't fit because it's like a square
That's the
peg
problem.
into a round hole.
What is acquisition misleading? It's M&A driven, but M&A driven is totally different than disruptive innovation. And what
Yes.
we do with M&A, we say, oh, it's accretive. You do everything for your market cap. But the problem is then you integrate only maybe the invoice is the only integration, but the products are not integrated. And they're
Yeah.
misleading. It means, and then you have your central marketing element. The marketing guys are making more effective.
Yeah.
They make the threshold higher, and
Yeah.
the customer is too naive, and the customer has no understanding from this one.
Yeah, because the brochure, of course, said everything integrates perfectly, just
Correct.
like the
Yeah,
confusion
yeah,
shift from 20 years ago,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I love the way
absolutely.
you said that. That was hilarious.
Yeah,
It's the same thing across several other organizations because the investors want to see growth in cloud subscription revenue
yeah,
and cloud users and companies
absolutely.
subscribing to
Yeah,
cloud. And so on the surface, it looks great when you buy somebody, and now you have an extra $100 million in cloud subscription revenue.
But even then,
But
yeah, a good point. The analysts are even too simple and too dumb. They're
yeah,
only looking to a subscription, but subscription, and they give you 10 times revenue for a subscription. But what you see, individual services on microservices and micro elements, that can maybe double you, triple your EBITDA. And there is much more money for the company. That
yeah,
means the unique elements are bringing more value for the customer, and the subscription elements are reducing the EBITDA for the customer. And all these fancy capitalists are looking only to a simple element. Oh, what is subscription? That is
yeah,
obsolete. It should be totally obsolete.
yeah, because there's no way for them to capitalize that.
Hey, that's
And
that. Yeah, but if
fundamentally,
yeah, but
for
it's more to
utilities, this
capitalize.
is killing them.
Yeah, but capitalization should be the what we even see this where you have this vendor intimacy, this intimacy of the customer. It's customer intimacy, then you have the customer for life.
Yeah,
And the value should be, okay, what is your delivery element for the customer?
yeah,
Yeah, not in an invoice where you take unknown components, but more what are you bringing to the core business processes?
yeah, yeah.
But the venture capitalists are too simple to understand this yet.
And I think the idea of an over-index on the total addressable market for software
Yeah.
and an over-index on the standardization of whatever the software is feels outdated,
Terrible.
because one of the things that I know Rapid and Rio are both working on are creating the conditions where the probabilistic power of AI, Gen AI, agents, throw all the buzzwords at it, sure, but it's the probabilistic generation.
Exactly.
And then matching that with the enterprise need for the deterministic
Yeah.
repeatability,
Exactly.
stability, because at scale, the stability is critical.
Yeah.
And the
Absolutely.
probabilistic, I think we've both probably tried, or people in our team have asked one of these LLMs the same question 100 times,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter how you tune it, you don't get the same answer 100 times.
And no, and I should say more what you see. Software is by far too expensive, 10 times too expensive if
Yeah,
you look in the old world, but it's even not contributing to the EBITDA. And now we see we can make it 10 times cheaper to generate, but much more contribution to the EBITDA. And that is even the element is more real for the job to be done,
yeah,
to real contribute. And what we see now with the agents, we call it, I sometimes call them the butlers, but the
the butlers.
agents, how could
Yeah,
they help me to do my job in a better way? But then we need all the data stream. We need
yep.
end-to-end data.
Yeah, and that I think that data and treating those agents as a butler, as an assistant, as somebody that's
Yeah,
helping you, the idea that sometimes people imagine, I would even say they hallucinate, the
yeah,
people hallucinate, is the idea that those agents or butlers can just automatically take care of it for them. But
yeah,
really, they're helping with part of it, and they still need somebody to go and check their work
yeah.
because they're still working more like an intern.
And I should say the perfect is the enemy of the good. Don't
Yes.
expect a perfect solution. It's more you increase it permanently. And that is where AI
Yeah.
has not to be perfect, but it brings already some, but then the executor, the human should understand this one. And it makes the
Yeah.
human 5 times more effective, productive. Yeah.
Productive. Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Jan, when I think about how you were talking about in today's world, the way ERPs and the way a lot of enterprise software are organized, we think about the transactions are not enough, right? So ERPs were designed around
Yeah,
transactions
exactly.
because it used to be giant ledgers
Yeah.
on paper that people had to
Transactional
compare.
system.
But transactions aren't enough. Can you tell us more about that?
Now, for you start with transactions, and everything is stored in the logic, and the transactions are limited only to a silo in one central database with sometimes 100,000 database tables. That means you do not have access to warehouse management. You do not have access to PLM. You do not have access direct to the data. Only with bill of material you can integrate a little.
Yeah.
And then very soon these processes are dying because if you go a little downstream, a transaction-oriented system is going to rules to case management. Now, and ERP cannot handle this one. Now we built in 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in Cordis, we built what we called also case management integration. You have then a transaction layer and a case layer. We call it the collaborative workspace.
Yep.
where we could take the processes longer, but it was only till the processes. Now we're moving from silos with transactions to processes, but now to execution means now to the workflow. In
Yeah.
the workflow, on this moment, we don't need any longer the processes. The workflow in the containerization are running with Kubernetes type of elements. Now, that is so much simpler, like Lego blocks. They
Yeah.
are becoming agentic, AI-driven microservices. Now, and there is the power. But
Yeah.
the good stuff is, the kids from Google, we mentioned already, do not understand this yet. Now, we can decouple that. We can decouple the old ERP. If you have only the data once a day and once a 2 days is good enough for today.
Yeah. Because like you were saying, we don't need to run MRP every 3 minutes.
Like, you win more downstream. And even AI have no influence upstream, very little. And
Yeah.
downstream's 100 times more. The more downstream, the more you have repetitive processes. You deal with documents, you have to procure, you collaborate. And
Yeah.
in ERP is dictating. There's not so
Yeah.
much collaborating.
Yeah.
And the dictating is under the hood.
Oh, they're totally dictating. I don't know if anyone has ever been successful arguing with SAP about which tax rate should be applied to a transaction.
Yeah,
It's it
yeah,
would be like me arguing with my wife about whether or not we're going to put mosaic tiles in the kitchen. Of
yeah,
course, we're going to
yeah,
put mosaic tiles. This
yeah,
is the way it's going to go.
absolute. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and therefore, see, but the question is, if you look to complex stuff, you have also gained 3 layers. In a car, you have even what we call the medical stuff. You have even the electronical stuff and the software. But
Yep.
these three technology waves have to unite together. And
Yeah.
therefore, if you are trying to do everything in a modern way, you cannot do it. You have to
Yeah.
combine it. And that's what we see now in the world of these nerds who do not understand this stuff. They only are isolated. They only come in when the documents are there, but they cannot come in from the glacier from the beginning of the river.
Yeah.
When the river is created by a glacier, and they see that as ERP.
Yeah.
But if you go more downstream the river, you have these activities. ERP is like an iron castle, you know.
Yeah.
But then you
Yeah.
need a fleet who is communicating there. This is microservices. Now you should combine that. People should have a creative way of thinking in an architectural element. Now I've been here 3 generations. Now, and knowing how to combine these 3 generations together.
Yeah. One of the things that keeps striking me as an analogy is, people that they're drinking milk, but they don't really know that it comes from a cow. They've never milked a cow.
Yeah, yeah,
Or, and you and I have both milked the cows
yeah,
as it relates
yeah,
to
yeah.
this
Absolutely.
stuff.
We know how to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to burn it. I burned my ships because the problem is you make too much market cap to say at your service and how to milk the customer. We're milking the customer with this legacy vendor lock-in stuff. It is not
Yeah.
fair. We are even uh, say even protecting we're not giving the customer the opportunity to improve.
Yeah.
We isolate them. We're stealing a lot of money from the industry. ERP is stealing a lot of money from the industry with this vendor lock-in old stuff. The EBITDA could be 5 times better if we look to all the stuff. The market cap could be a tremendous much better from these simple manufacturing companies. Why is it that Nvidia, etc., are making so much market cap? And they're only doing toys for gambling, for anywhere. I mean, the core manufacturers are isolated from all their stuff. Little.
And the way the ERPs are designed for transactions means that there's still an expectation that somebody is sitting there somehow putting in each transaction. The
Yeah,
level of automation that's possible today, there's a lot of capabilities in ERPs that still haven't been adopted, even though
oh,
they
yeah,
were released 20, 30, 40 years
yeah,
ago.
absolutely.
And because they're complex, there's such an aversion sometimes to even approach the complexity because somebody tried that once and it was hard and it didn't
Yeah.
work. But just because it was hard and it didn't work didn't mean it was invalid. It
The biggest,
means,
yeah, the biggest problem is you're selling more, and you see you bring more functionality. But in my highest point in Baan, maybe in 1998 or so, maybe only 5% of my customers were able to use even less than 50% of the functionality.
yeah,
I mean, but most functionality is only for market cap. And you destroy, you make it too complicated. That's the mother of all complexity. We bring we added so much more functionality to win the POC
yeah,
and win the tender
yeah,
because more functionality and the customer is not aware that even you make it too complicated. You have to
Yeah.
fine tune it, and that means assemble to order. You have to assemble all those stuff very specific. You need a product configurator. We call it an SBOM, a software bill of material,
Yep.
to continuously configure the components for a specific execution for the processes.
And I think this idea of of configuring to help, even though if you're going to go buy a car, there's a thousand different ways that you could combine the pieces.
Yeah,
When you go online on the website, you can pick packages and bundles, and
yeah,
there's a whole series of steps that were done to keep
yeah,
it simpler for people.
yeah.
Because the machines maybe can understand there's a thousand different combinations, but a person wants to
Yeah.
know that there's three or four bundles
Absolutely.
and a
Yeah.
handful of options.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, the person gets
But
overwhelmed.
AI can help us a lot now, and that's what we
Yeah.
see. And therefore, we should see the real configuration should be in the microservices.
Yep.
And for a while, for the time being, you take the ERP for granted.
Yep.
But with reverse engineering, step by step, we call it sunset. Every day, you can replace some elements and bring it to microservices. And then you are no longer in a big project to change it. It's safe.
Yep.
Don't go a new version. Sunset the old one and step by step bring it to microservices.
And this decoupled, event-driven microservices is really the foundation of most
Absolutely.
modern solutions. And
Yeah,
it's even the foundation of how AWS and Amazon have built their
yeah,
entire
exactly.
organization.
But there are two elements in manufacturing. One is decoupling, but the other one is late binding. Now, let me give you an example. A Boeing a new plane, it takes 9 months and come as a monster in a big hall and flying after 9 months. Tesla,
Yep.
what is every 5 seconds is a new car is dropping there. And an hour before the 5 seconds, maybe you can change the engine. Now, it means in late binding, the more you integrate IoT stuff, do it on the latest moment in your workflow. It's 100 times simpler. The sensors can do it. If you do it upstream, it's 100 times more complicated. And the ARP vendors like to do it upstream because they're all milking you. And the ISVs even like it upstream. And they do it with the Baan piece, they do it with technology from 30 years ago.
Yeah. And I think this flexibility that business needs today is part of what good looks like.
Yeah,
It's part of the base requirement to take a bunch of the forced complexity where rigidity of systems that were designed 30, 40 years ago with
yeah,
technology available at the time
yeah, yeah.
are still driving what people describe as good looks
Exactly.
like today, forcing so many decisions upstream in the process that with more flexibility are possible to adjust, not necessarily in the snap of a finger, but with
Yeah.
a greater degree of flexibility in the moment and greater customer intimacy.
Yeah, what we do, we build beautiful cars, but the engine is still a horse. We we have still the horse to execute. It's even
Yeah.
not premise, etc. I mean, you have then a nice car, but we take maybe lighter, and the horse can go maybe a little faster. Instead of flying 1,000 kilometers an hour, we do it 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers an hour. We are so slow because we are doing it with the constraints of the old technology.
Yeah. And it's still foundationally 30, 40, 50 years old
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely. Yeah.
most of the limits of
More
technology.
elements, even in my Baan system, 80% of the functionality is still used and is built by us in the 80s. And it
Yeah.
is too complicated. It's too complicated because the kids of cloud native do not understand the logic in that code.
Yeah.
There's also a big problem there.
Absolutely. Jan, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to share ideas with you, to learn from you, and to go and help share this with the world, to help more people learn from you. I am really grateful for the opportunity, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
I
Um,
love it very much.
all right, Jan, thank
Love your
you,
platform.
bedankt. And thank you to all of you that are watching. And this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Jan. All the best. Take care.